My name is Clara Royce. I was never meant to inherit anything that came with grease on it. That's what my brother said. Ben stood by the walk-in freezer, arms crossed, apron still damp from lunch rush. He looked at me like I was asking for a seat at a table I didn't help set. "This business," he said, "isn't for soft hands or big ideas." He didn't say it to hurt me. He said it like a fact, like gravity. My younger brother Mason laughed. The kinda laugh that doesn't leave room to respond. I didn't argue. I stood there in a white blouse and block heels, holding the folder I'd made. Streamlined workflows, staffing projections, a small marketing refresh, just ideas, just options. But to them, it was intrusion. To them, I was the one who left, and they were the ones who stayed. It used to be our father's place, Royce and Sons, a steakhouse that clung to its reputation like a scar. Cash only on Sundays, oil-stained floors, a laminated menu that hadn't changed since '94. Dad had a stroke the week before Thanksgiving. He hadn't updated the ownership documents in years, so by default, by silence, by family dynamics, no one questioned out loud. Ben and Mason took over. Mom said it was natural. "Ben's been running the kitchen since he could hold a knife," she told me. "Mason handles the books. You've got your own world now." I said I wanted to help. She offered me a position in the back. "Dishwasher," she said. "You'd be involved. It might even be grounding for you." Grounding. As if I'd floated too far above them. As if having a degree in hospitality made me unstable. My first day, Mason tossed me an apron, still wet from someone else's shift. "Try not to wrinkle it," he joked. "I know you're used to cleaner work." I didn't flinch. I just tied it tight. Ben didn't look at me. He pointed toward the sink and muttered, "That's where you'll be." I scrubbed quietly, listened more than I spoke, observed the mess beneath the rhythm. They were losing staff every month. Orders went missing. Refrigeration was off. The POS terminal crashed twice a day. Customers weren't returning. But no one wanted to hear that, especially not from me. 2 weeks in, I made a polite suggestion. Not a lecture, just an observation. About signage, about brunch hours, about flow. Ben set his knife down. "This isn't one of your case studies, Clara. This is a real kitchen." Mason added, "If you think you can do it better, go start your own." I didn't quit. They fired me, said I was disrupting morale. I nodded, untied the apron, and left through the back. No scene, no goodbye. That night, Mom made stew. Same chipped bowls, same seat for Dad, even though he hadn't spoken in months. She said I needed to understand. "They've worked harder," she told me. "Let them have this." I asked her if she really believed that. She looked down at her hands and said nothing. I stopped visiting after that. Ben and Mason turned Royce and Sons into a sinking ship, dressed like a family portrait. The community smiled, but the accounts didn't. I followed from a distance, watched notices pile up. The building's owner died. His son inherited the deed and didn't care for late payments. That's when I made my move. I called someone I knew, Lyle Barrett, an investor with clean books and a quiet signature. He handled the paperwork. I stayed invisible. 3 weeks later, I owned the building. Not through Clara Royce, through a name that meant nothing to them. I let the clock run. 1 late rent notice turned into 3. I waited for the 4th. Then I walked in, wearing that same apron they laughed at. They didn't recognize me right away. Not until I stepped up to the counter and said, "Is Ben in?" He came out, wiping his hands, annoyed. "Who are you?" Then he saw me, his jaw locked. Mason stepped forward, confused. I handed them an envelope. "This is final," I said. "You've got 48 hours." Ben opened it, read the letterhead, read it again. Then Mason looked at me like I'd stolen something. "What is this?" he asked. I looked him in the eye. "You told me I wasn't part of the family business." I waited a beat. "So I bought the building it operated in." They said nothing. Even Mom was there that day, helping reset cutlery. She sat down in one of the booths, slowly, as if gravity had shifted. I turned toward the door, then stopped. "I'm still part of the family," I said, "just not part of the failure." Then I left. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. I just walked. I didn't want revenge. Not at first. I just wanted proof that I wasn't imagining things, that I wasn't the problem, that the air in that kitchen had gone sharp the moment I stepped in, that the way my mother looked away after every betrayal wasn't some harmless habit. So I did what they didn't expect. I stayed quiet, I stayed useful, and I started looking into deeds. The building that housed Royce and Sons had been owned for years by a man named Donald Hart. Quiet landlord, no drama, no improvements, just collected checks and moved on. He was dead, liver cancer. His son, Craig, inherited the property 4 months before I was fired. Craig lived in another state, wasn't sentimental, didn't care who the tenants were, which meant he cared about one thing: cash flow. I found him through public records, sent an inquiry through a management firm I'd once interned for, under a different name. I didn't use Royce, not even Clara. To Craig, I was just a representative for a buyer. We kept it clean. Clean is what Craig liked. The first time I spoke with Lyle Barrett was at a restaurant 3 blocks from the campus, where I earned my degree, not the kind of place Ben or Mason would walk into, unless they were fixing the plumbing. Lyle was a former professor's husband, managed a portfolio of low-drama properties. He liked predictability. I liked discretion. I told him the location, the layout, the missed rent history, the foot traffic potential. He nodded, did the math. "This place got family ties?" he asked. "Not to you," I said. He smirked, then said something I never forgot. "Tell me where the rot is. I'll handle the termites." He fronted the deal. His firm bought the building, all in cash, no press, no flags. But there was one condition: I'd be his operating consultant for the next year. On paper, I was a quiet name in a quiet file, but inside the firm, I set the terms. The purchase closed on a Tuesday. Craig signed without reading half the clauses. Lyle wired the funds by noon. By nightfall, the building was his, which meant, quietly, it was mine. I didn't tell anyone. I let my brothers keep operating. They hung their awards on peeling walls, bragged about being family-owned, while the garbage stacked up behind the alley. The first missed rent notice came 6 weeks later. They blamed an accounting error. Then the second came. They blamed slow weekends. The third, they didn't respond to. By the time the fourth arrived, Lyle called me and asked, "Do you want to serve it, or should I?" I didn't answer right away. I waited. Then I walked to the back of my closet, pulled out the apron they gave me that first week, the one Mason tossed without looking. Still smelled like lemon soap and steam. I folded it neatly into my bag. When I showed up, the kitchen was loud. Staff moving like they had somewhere to be. A dishwasher shouting for more gloves. Mason barking about inventory. They didn't notice me until I stepped behind the pass. Ben turned, eyes narrowing. He recognized the apron before he recognized me. "Clara," I held up the envelope. "This is from your landlord." His face drained. Mason stepped out of the back with a stack of invoices. "What are you doing?" he asked. I handed him the letter. Let the silence build as he read it. When he reached the part about eviction, he looked up. "Who signed this?" I didn't answer. I just pointed to the bottom. Lyle's name, his firm. But I saw their eyes move past that, down to the contact line. Consultant, Clara Royce Ben, didn't speak. Mason shook his head. "You did this," he said. "To us." "To the building," I said. "Not to you." "But we're family." I nodded. "You told me I wasn't part of the family business." I paused. "So I bought the thing that made it a business." They didn't argue. They just stared. Maybe because they finally saw what I'd been building while they ignored me. Not noise, not spite. Structure. I walked out without another word. Didn't need a scene. I already had the signature that mattered. Back in my apartment, I sat at the counter and poured myself a drink. Dad's old watch was still on the bookshelf beside me. He hadn't worn it since the stroke. When I visited last month, Mom didn't even remember I took it. That night, I held it in my hand. It was stuck on 407. The same time the papers were signed. Same time the building stopped belonging to them. And quietly, without asking, started belonging to me. They didn't call right away. Pride makes men wait, even when the floor is falling out beneath them. But 4 days after the eviction notice, I got a voicemail from my mother. Her voice was soft, almost like she was standing in church. "Clara," she said, "your brothers are very upset. I'm not sure what's happening, but maybe we can talk?" She didn't ask if I was okay, didn't ask why, just wanted it to go away. The next message came from Mason, longer, louder. He tried every tone: confusion, guilt, negotiation. "This isn't fair," he said. "Dad would never have wanted this." Funny how they only remembered Dad when leverage was involved. He didn't mention the meetings I was excluded from, didn't mention the pitch I was mocked for, or the shift I was fired from. He just kept saying, "We can fix this, let's fix this, we're family." I let it sit for a week. Lyle asked if I wanted to fast-track the lockout. "No," I said. "They'll move faster if they think they still have a chance." I knew them well enough to know panic doesn't make them humble, it makes them louder. Sure enough, Ben showed up at my apartment, unannounced, 10:42 a.m. I watched him through the peephole for a full minute before opening the door. He wore the same jacket from the restaurant, still had grease on the cuff. He didn't ask to come in, just started talking. "You've made your point," he said, "but this hurts more than just us. Staff, vendors, even Mom." I stayed silent. He tried again. "Is this really about a dishwashing job? About a stupid comment?" I stepped aside, let him stand in the middle of my living room, where everything was clean and deliberate. He looked out of place, like he didn't know where to set his feet. "What do you want?" he finally asked. "Money." I almost laughed. I didn't. Instead, I walked to the shelf, pulled down the old Royce ledger, one of the few things I took from Dad's office before they locked me out. I flipped to the page I'd marked, showed him the monthly profits, handwritten in Dad's stiff scrawl, then showed him a printout of the restaurant's recent debt load. "You've been bleeding money since January," I said. "You just didn't know how fast." He stared. I handed him the spreadsheet. "This is what I wanted to show you that day in the staff room." His hand trembled slightly. Then he said it again. "Fine. Then what do you want?" I closed the file. "I want you to leave before the locks change." Later that night, Mason emailed Lyle's office, said they wanted to make a counteroffer, said they had outside investors and a rescue plan. Lyle forwarded it to me with the subject line, "Too little too late." I told him to respond politely. Let them try. Let them sweat. The truth is, there was never going to be a rescue plan. The restaurant wasn't just failing because of rent. It was failing because they were stubborn. They believed showing up every day was the same as running a business. They thought longevity meant they were owed something. They forgot how many businesses die quietly, even with history on the walls. The buyout proposal came 3 days later. It was amateur, too thin, too emotional. No timeline, no equity split, just a cash lump sum and a list of names that looked borrowed. Ben signed the email. "We want to keep Dad's dream alive." I stared at those words for a long time. Not because they moved me, but because they proved what I already knew. They never saw me as part of that dream, only the threat to it. Mom called again. This time she didn't whisper. She cried, said I was destroying everything, that I was just like Craig, the old landlord, cold, unfeeling, transactional. "You used to be kind," she said. That stuck with me longer than I want to admit. The day after, I visited Dad. He didn't speak, of course, not since the second stroke. He sat in the chair by the window of the care home, blanket tucked around his knees, TV playing a silent movie he didn't follow. I sat beside him, held his hand. Then I took out the ledger, showed it to him. His eyes didn't track, but I showed him anyway. "Your sons are losing your legacy," I said softly. "So I saved the part you left unguarded." A nurse walked by. I nodded, closed the book, and kissed his temple. They moved out the following Monday. Didn't call, didn't say goodbye, just left the key under the mat with a note scribbled on the back of an invoice. It said, "Hope it was worth it." I didn't respond because it wasn't about worth. It was about weight. The weight of being told you're not part of something you spent your whole life orbiting. The weight of watching incompetence get dressed up as loyalty. The weight of hearing the word family used like a leash, and finally setting it down. They thought I'd keep it going. Even after the eviction, even after the final invoice was signed and the lock changed, there was still that assumption. Whispers from old staff, messages from vendors, hopeful texts from local food bloggers. Is Royce and Sons reopening under new management? No one asked what I wanted. They just assumed I'd carry the name forward like a dutiful daughter. But I had no interest in reviving a dying body just to prove it still breathed. The first thing I did was tear the sign down. Didn't make a show of it. No press. No ribbon cutting. I hired a crew at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. Quiet hands, efficient. The kind who didn't ask questions when I pointed and said, "That goes." They took it down in one piece. The rust pattern behind the old metal logo was the only proof it had ever been there. I told them to leave it bare. I wanted the scar to show. Inside, the place was hollow. The booths smelled like stale grease. The walk-in fridge still hummed, even though it was empty. I stood in the middle of the dining room for over an hour and said nothing. Then I pulled out my notebook and started sketching. I didn't want another restaurant. I wanted a workspace, but not the kind you rent by the hour. Something real, physical. A studio for small food entrepreneurs. Bakers, caterers, chefs who didn't have the capital for their own brick and mortar. A place to test, to launch, to start again. I called it The Shift, a name they would hate because it sounded modern, because it wasn't theirs. Lyle helped me with the permits. He smiled when I told him what I was planning. "They're going to think you're competing with them," he said. I shrugged. If they think that, they were never competition. He laughed quietly, then added, "You know, your father would have liked this." I didn't answer right away, because I didn't know if it was true, and I didn't want to say something just to feel better. The Shift opened its doors 12 weeks after the final Royce invoice. No ad campaign, just word of mouth. A quiet page on social media. A few photos of the new interior. Concrete countertops, open prep stations, natural light. No photos of me. No press release with my name. I wanted it to grow without a face, without a family, without anyone attaching it to a bloodline or a legacy, just a place that worked. The first tenant was a woman named June, mid-30s, former pastry chef, fired after a disagreement with a head chef who stole her recipe and trademarked it. She showed up with 2 crates of lemons, a stand mixer, and no apology in her posture. I gave her the early morning shift. By week 3, her lemon tarts were selling out by 9:30 a.m. Next came Calvin, Jamaican-born, second gen, ran a jerk chicken stall at the farmer's market until the city cracked down on unlicensed grills. He didn't trust me at first, until I told him, plainly, "You set the menu, I handle the permits, just pay rent and keep your station clean." He nodded, took the corner space near the bay window, and made it smell like memory. The place filled itself, not with customers, with creators, people who'd been told no, told they were too inexperienced, too ambitious, too different. Sounded familiar. I didn't run a register. I managed schedules, coordinated health inspections, built custom ordering systems that adapted to each chef. I did what I was trained to do. The work, they said, had no place in a kitchen. Every now and then, a local would walk in, squint at the walls, and say, "Wasn't this that old steakhouse?" Someone would shrug. Maybe June would nod politely. But no one said the name. No one remembered the Royce brothers. They remembered the smells now, the bread, the heat, the energy. They remembered the shift. One afternoon, as I was restocking paper goods, I saw my mother across the street. She stood on the curb for a while, just watching. I didn't wave. She didn't cross. After maybe 10 minutes, she turned and walked away. She never reached out again. Neither did Mason. Ben sent one message, months later, just a sentence, "I hope you're happy." I never replied, because happy isn't the right word for what I became. I became something else, clear, certain, unapologetic. On the 1-year anniversary of the closing, I hosted a small night market, just our members, no outside press, no speeches. Each chef brought their best dish. We opened the doors at 5 p.m. and closed when the lights dimmed. Before we turned out the last one, I stood near the old walk-in freezer and traced my hand along the scar on the wall where the Royce and Sons sign used to hang. For the first time in years, I didn't feel erased. I felt written. The invitation came in an envelope, handwritten, cream-colored, no logo, no return address, just my name across the front. Inside was a single card. Community Business Heritage Night, honoring local legacy families. A dinner, a microphone, a photo backdrop. The Royce family listed on the second line, just under a florist and a bakery I didn't recognize. My brothers were speaking. I wasn't listed at all. It didn't surprise me. What surprised me was the note tucked behind the card. No signature, just 5 words in the same careful script. It would mean a lot. I left the envelope on my kitchen counter for a week. Didn't touch it. Didn't answer the follow-up text from Mason. Didn't answer the one after that either. Ben didn't bother trying. He knew better than to ask me to smile for a photo I'd be cropped out of anyway. But the part of me that stayed quiet for too long, the one that used to sit through family dinners like a guest in someone else's house, wanted to see what they'd say without me, what version they'd tell. So I showed up, not for them, for clarity. The event was held at a downtown banquet hall, high ceilings, rented lighting, fake ivy crawling up white lattice panels. I wore a dark green suit. Simple, controlled, no name tag. I didn't sit with them. I stood near the back, beside a server replenishing the coffee urns. From there, I could see everything. They hadn't changed. Ben still adjusted the mic like it was beneath him. Mason still wore too much cologne. My mother, seated at the front, smiled like she'd never seen a camera she didn't love. They were introduced as second-generation owners of one of the town's oldest restaurants. They didn't correct the host. They didn't mention the building was gone. They didn't say the name was no longer theirs. They just told stories about Dad's first grill, about family recipes, about how Royce and Sons stood for hard work and sacrifice and tradition. They used words like we and ours, words they'd never used when I scrubbed dishes or offered spreadsheets or asked to be heard. They ended with applause. Mom stood to hug them. A camera flashed. The audience clapped again. That was when I turned to leave. But then I heard the host say, "And now, to close the night, a few words from someone very special." My feet stopped. I turned back. They didn't say my name, just another member of the Royce family. My mother was smiling, her hands folded in anticipation. She'd orchestrated this, not to honor me, to use me. One last image, one public nod, proof that the family was whole again. I walked to the stage slowly. Every eye tracked me, some confused, some curious, a few with faint recognition. Mason looked nervous. Ben looked blank. I took the mic and stood still, let the silence expand. Then I said, "I'm Clara." Pause. Some of you know me, some of you don't. Another pause. No one moved. I used to work for Royce and Sons, not as a manager, not as an owner, not even as a cook. I looked at Ben, then at Mason. I was given the dishwasher's apron, told I could stay involved, told my hands were too soft, that my ideas didn't belong. The room was very, very quiet. I continued. They ran it into the ground. And when it failed, I bought the building they couldn't afford to keep. Gasps, not dramatic, just sharp exhales, like someone knocked the wind from the room. I didn't save the restaurant, I said. I built something else, something better. I looked at the crowd. I don't say this out of bitterness. I say it because legacy doesn't belong to the loudest voice, or the ones with the mic. I let that hang. Then I added quietly, sometimes the ones who carry the legacy are the ones you told to stay in the back. I stepped down, didn't wait for applause. There wasn't any. My mother didn't look at me as I passed. Ben's jaw was locked. Mason was already reaching for his phone. But I didn't look back, not this time. Outside, the air was cool. The sky was overcast, the moon sharp behind clouds. I could still feel the warmth of the lights behind me, the buzz of a room trying to decide whether what they heard was bravery or betrayal. I didn't care what they decided. I just walked. Because that was the difference now. They needed me to smile. I didn't need them to. I didn't build the shift to be seen. But people saw it anyway. A local food blogger stopped by for a scone, left with a story. Then came a write-up in a regional magazine, "The Ghost Kitchen with a Soul." By the third month, there was a waiting list for time slots. By the sixth, we had inquiries from out-of-town chefs looking for satellite prep space. And by the ninth, the offer came. From a name I hadn't spoken aloud in years, Bennett Culinary Group. It wasn't personal at first, just a letter, crisp branding, clean font, too clean. They wanted a meeting, said they were interested in a strategic partnership, said they'd heard about my model. They didn't say my name until the final paragraph. Didn't call me Clara, just Ms. Royce. That was how I knew it was real. Because Bennett never got my name right when I interned there. 3 summers, no pay, long shifts, endless errands. They treated me like a receptionist who kept sneaking into meetings. I brought them pitch decks, data models, workflow maps. They said I was bright, but not a fit. Now they wanted a tour and possibly, eventually, an acquisition. They wanted my blueprint, my logistics, my systems, my vision. They wanted the thing my own family had laughed at. I scheduled the meeting, not because I needed them, but because I wanted to see how far the world had turned without their permission. They arrived in suits, 2 men, 1 woman, all smooth shoes and gentle smiles. They asked good questions, listened well, took photos, touched nothing. I showed them the bookings board, the profit graph, the custom-coded order system I built with 2 freelancers and a former pastry chef who now ran her own app consultancy from a corner desk. The woman, Claire, seemed impressed. The younger man did most of the talking. He called the shift a living case study. Then he asked if I'd ever considered franchising. I said, no. Then added, but I've considered replicating, just not under someone else's banner. He smiled politely, but his eyes narrowed a little. Claire stepped forward, said they were prepared to offer a generous figure, full acquisition, my systems, my name, my continued oversight, if I wanted it. I asked for time to think. That night, I walked the halls of the building, late, all the ovens off, floors clean, the smell of spice still clinging faintly to the ceiling. I thought about saying yes, not for the money. I didn't need it, but because some victories look better in print, and it would have made a beautiful headline. Rejected intern builds the model, then sells it back. But something about it didn't sit right, because what I built wasn't just a business. It was a correction, not a performance, not a payoff. I asked myself what they'd change. The branding, the structure, the tenants. They'd want metrics. They'd want control. They'd want to name the thing after themselves. And suddenly, I saw it. A version of the shift where June gets priced out, where Calvin gets reshuffled to a less marketable time slot, where the quiet edge I fought for becomes glossy and digestible. No sharp corners, no ghosts in the walls. 2 days later, I sent a reply. No thank you. I offered a walkthrough for their research team, licensing, if they wanted to learn from the system. But not ownership, never that. The man didn't write back. Claire did. Her message was short. Understood. Respect. Hope you know what you're sitting on. I did. But what mattered more was what I wasn't giving up. A week later, I got another letter. This one handwritten. No letterhead, no branding. Just a note folded inside a blank envelope, slipped under my office door. It said, I saw the article. I've never been prouder. Love, Dad. I sat at my desk for a long time. The note was unsigned, but I knew the handwriting. Shaky, unstable. But his. Mom must have helped him write it. Or maybe he'd asked someone at the home. I didn't cry. Just sat there and held it in my hand until the paper warmed. That night, I stood outside the building and looked up at the second-floor window. It was just brick and glass, but it was mine. Not in the legal sense, not just that, in the invisible sense, the one that can't be signed away or rebranded. It was built from the silence they gave me, and now it made noise. The kind of noise that gets heard in rooms I used to be locked out of. I didn't need their deal. I was the deal. And they knew it. I wasn't looking for them. I'd stopped checking their social feeds, stopped tracking rumors, stopped listening when staff whispered that someone saw Mason in a suit again, or that Ben was meeting a new, silent partner downtown. But one morning, June came in late, holding a glossy flyer. "Did you know about this?" she asked, dropping it on the prep table. I didn't answer, I just looked. Royce Revival, a modern twist on a legacy kitchen coming soon. Family roots, elevated flavors, a new chapter. They used Dad's initials in the logo. They used my words in the tagline. Even the copy sounded like my press releases. I knew the rhythm. I knew the structure. They didn't just relaunch. They replicated. I checked the address, a small space, 2 neighborhoods over, near the financial district. Trendier, cleaner, too clean. It hadn't opened yet, just branding teasers and a sign on the window. But the messaging was clear. They wanted the memory of the old restaurant, without the weight of its failure. They wanted me out of the story, but my shadow in the walls. I waited a few days, let it settle. Then I walked by the location. The windows were covered in butcher paper. I saw movement inside, boxes, paint samples, a bar being installed, and then, through the glass, I saw Mason, clipboard in hand, wearing a branded hoodie with the new logo on the sleeve. He didn't see me, but I watched long enough to feel the familiar heat rise in my chest. Not rage, not grief. Something colder. Recognition. They weren't building something new. They were cloning what they thought worked. And they thought what worked was a tone, a font, a borrowed format. But they forgot the part that mattered. They forgot the people. They didn't have June, or Calvin, or the quiet code written in tension and sleepless nights. They had branding. I had blood. Still, I didn't move yet. Let them think they were safe. Let them think the silence meant permission. I went home and pulled out my old notes, the ones they threw out, the ones they mocked, the ones Ben once said were too corporate for a family kitchen. Now they were using them, line for line. Except now I had timestamps. I had proof. I called Lyle the next morning. Told him I wasn't looking for a lawsuit. "Not yet," I said. "I just want to know who's backing them." He made 2 calls, called me back that evening. "It's Peter Grant," he said. "Private investor, lives in the Heights, tech money, fast turnover guy." I knew the name. He was on a panel once that rejected my startup grant proposal 3 years ago. He said my idea was too niche to scale. Now he was bankrolling my brothers to copy it. Lyle paused. "Want me to set up a meeting?" I said yes. We met at a rooftop bar 2 nights later. Peter was younger than I remembered, slicker, tired in that wealthy, overstimulated way. He smiled too much. I didn't. He started casual. "Look, I didn't know you were related," he said. "This is just business." I nodded. "Then you won't mind if I treat it that way." His smile faltered. "I'm not here to stop them," I said. "I'm here to correct the record. I don't follow. You're about to open a concept based entirely on work you didn't pay for. Brand identity, layout logic, market language. It's mine." He blinked. "You're saying you want credit?" I leaned forward. "I want clarity." He didn't speak for a while. Then he said, "Look, if you're thinking lawsuit—" "I'm not," I interrupted. "I'm thinking conversation." I slid a file across the table. Inside were excerpts of my proposals, archived emails, my rejected Bennett Group pitch deck, featuring phrasing they'd now lifted verbatim. A pattern, a blueprint, a trap. Peter skimmed, and he understood. Because men like him don't care about ethics until you show them it's cheaper to settle than to fight. "I can talk to the brothers," he said slowly. "Maybe we change the name. Maybe some kind of licensing arrangement." I didn't answer, just watched the sun slip behind the skyline. Finally, I said, "You're welcome to open your restaurant." He looked surprised. "But when it opens," I continued, It will carry a quiet line at the bottom of every page, every menu, every website footer. He blinked. What line? Concept Licensing, an Operational Framework by Clara Royce. His face changed, and for the first time that night, he didn't smile. "I'll talk to them," he said. I nodded, finished my drink, stood up. As I walked away, he called after me. "Why do you care that much about a line of text?" I didn't turn around, but I said, clearly, because they spent their whole lives trying to erase mine. They launched on a Sunday, grand opening, press, soft jazz, a curated photo wall featuring Dad's face, cropped just right. But I only looked for one thing, and it was there, bottom of the homepage, tiny gray font. Concept Licensing and Operational Framework by Clara Royce. They didn't announce it, didn't highlight it, but it was there, buried, quiet, permanent. Within a week, food blogs picked it up, a whisper, then a headline. Royce Brothers Revival, more like a Royce Sisters system. Then came the podcast invite, then the radio segment. I turned them all down. I didn't need airtime. They did. The fallout started small. Mason got defensive in interviews. Ben stopped showing up to public tastings. Customers started asking the wrong questions, or the right ones, depending on the angle. And in every version of the story, my name got longer. Not Clara Royce, sister of, just Clara Royce, the mind behind the shift. The owner of the building they lost, the shadow beneath their spotlight. It happened at the grocery store. No cameras, no crowd. Just me, a basket of limes, and Mason, mid-aisle, holding a bottle of hot sauce. He looked thinner, tired, not angry. He walked up slow. "You won," he said. I said nothing. He nodded, like that was expected. Then, "Why'd you do it this way?" I looked at him. "You called me soft. That was Ben." You laughed. He swallowed, set the bottle down, tried again. "We weren't trying to erase you." I held his stare. "You didn't have to. You just had to keep talking over me." He nodded again, quiet this time. Then, "You're not coming back, are you?" No. Even now, he wanted an ending where we stood side by side. But I'd already buried that version of the story. He walked away without another word, and I left with the limes. Some truths don't need retelling. They just need to be lived. Dad passed 2 months later, in his sleep. They gave him a quiet funeral, no speeches, no drama. I sat in the back, wore gray. No one asked me to say anything, so I didn't. After the service, my mother approached. She held my hand, briefly, then whispered, "He was proud of you." I nodded. Didn't ask how she knew. Didn't ask why she never said it when he was still breathing. Back at the shift, June was prepping lavender bread. Calvin was arguing about spice blends with a new tenant. It smelled like effort, like risk, like clarity. I stood by the window, watched the light hit the corner of the concrete wall where the old sign used to hang. It was just a blank space now, but in my mind, it read, "Built by the one they tried to forget." And now they never could.